Hello and welcome to another episode here in the theoretical part, and this is more a continuation from part 1b, where we went through the shopping list, through all the generals and took a look what is needed finally. And when I tell you something about the impossible surface, then we have here maybe a light source, we have an object, perhaps that object has a background here somewhere, and we have of course a Cinema 4D camera here, and we want to take a look to this object. For that we need a surface, a texture, and we have of course the influence from not only one light source, and that is pretty much all we want to do here right now. So the idea is of course, what does it mean when I say the impossible surface? And the impossible surface is of course the impossible surface to capture. Texture is the main theme here, and I guess that this whole theme is more toward starters, beginners of the 3D art history world. And if you're already seasoned to do these capture stuff in Cinema 4D, then you have maybe already figured out which material works directly in Cinema 4D, which you can simulate, synthesize, or whatever you like to call it, and where you can take maybe from the real world a texture. Sometimes this will not work, and I will jump over to something that we not even consider to do with a still texture. I have shot these waves here, of course, with way more frames per second than you can see it now. So we have here a little bit slow motion effect, and the whole capturing was done with a red camera where overcranking is not a big deal and it's easy to do. So what we have here is of course a lot of details, and it looks very simple for a start, but in fact we have here objects inside the water, so we have different colors here. This was maybe not the first thing that you have seen, so I start with that. We have light that goes into the water and get refracted back to the surface. So sometimes we see here the white stuff, the foam and all of that. That is of course something that is also illuminated and has the light from the water and from the sun. As you can see, it's when it is here underneath of the waves, then we get some shadows here. So interestingly enough, we have the first point, of course, that is when we have inside of the material a time factor, when I take here a clock to symbolize this. And there was of course a little bit more, and I want to go through these little parts of course in detail, and for that I go to Lightroom and I have snapped some images with my pocket camera, so bear with me when the quality is a little bit low, but you get the idea of course. I know that I will not be able to give you all the possibilities where it is impossible to capture the surface, but I try to give you some logical steps where you can identify instantly what is possible and what is not. And of course, to have a texture, and to take here a little pun, it's the frozen view of something. And in this way I have here an ice block where I have put a flower into it, a big flower, and this is of course a three-dimensional object, and it is more or less transparent. It has a base of water, that means it's refractive even in ice, and we have in different layers these flowers in it. And so the problem is of course with the little air bubbles here inside that we have when we move the camera, when we move the object, or when we move the light source, each time a different appearance of this object. And if I would give this maybe into 20 hands of 20 experienced photographers, I would get at least 20 different results of it. And this is of course one indicator that we have to take a look what can change, and would this change the surface appearance. And that means when this object here is 3D and has transparency or something similar, when it's not 100% opaque, then we have a problem. That means also what we have seen, if the camera is moving or the object would move, and I do this here with the same, or the light source would move, then we run into a problem. One, two or all three move, that would be always a problem. And normally when we have an object like the ice cube and we would say camera, object and light would move at the same time, then based on the transparency we can see the background, and when that is not moving with it, we have a change as well. So there's a lot of things going on just by having an ice block here and think, oh, that should be simple. But we have pretty much nearly every problem except for the time. And time comes into the game when we have a longer weight on the texture, because as I said, this is an ice cube and it can melt down, and that was the idea in the first place, to create it, a time-lapse of it. Similar to the leaves in the ice cube is of course what we can see here. We have light from the back, and the parts of the whole scenery cast shadows on the backside as well, which shows up on the front side. This is perhaps for still not a bad idea to have, because it gives more reality on it, but for an animation this is perhaps a dead giveaway that we haven't done our homework here, because that all leaves move all the time in the same speed, in the same direction, and that's not really the way I see it. And so this shadow here, for example, should move a little bit different than the leaf by itself. And of course, each shadow here, these three, I would guess, have a different speed as well. And so we have a lot of life inside of this. And to capture this is more or less a question of a combination that we get in the channels in the material editor. It's not done just to capture this even leaf by leaf. When I was collecting images for this episode here, I found this edge of the car. And I thought this is perfect, because here we have a nice collection of areas that is not even nearly possible to take in as a texture. Of course, for small cars in the background this is perfect, but for anything that comes close we will see that isn't working. And go to any car that has a situation like this. You have tons of materials sandwiched on top of each other, and this is my theme here, where we have a reflector, where we have glass in front, and sometimes even something like a prism. And these little areas here, for example, they are all little prisms to destroy any clear view to the background. And then we can see sometimes through the glass, sometimes through that sandwich, sometimes we see even more. And it's an reflection inside, especially here, that doesn't work as an image by itself. And we can see here we have little highlights, refractive lights, not specular highlights, and we have specular highlights as well. So this is all a big game where any movement of the object, of the light or the camera, would change the appearance. And when you take a look here, and that was the reason why I took this car, this gives a reflection of the surrounding here, and it has highlights here, and it's very, very simple to see here that you have a lot of life inside. And sorry for the noise here, it was a point and shoot camera only, because I was only collecting evidence. So these highlights here will move. That's nothing that should stay on a texture. That needs to be replaced at least. This area here is a blue plastic, transparent, with an reflective part behind it. Again, a sandwiched model here of a material. This is really hard to get in one step, because it has also some refractive elements in it. So whatever you see through it, it's like looking through a magnification glass and then back to it. It's not just simple reflective. So there's a lot of stuff going on that is not solvable with a texture, and that's the theme here. I have shot the same car, this time with just moving the camera, and have an eye on this highlight here. We will see it's now here, same car, and I haven't moved so much, only the camera, and now it's even here, very small. And this is also an example here for an rear backlight, brake light, and we have some metallic paint on it, which is also pretty impossible to capture in a texture. This needs to be done with noise and reflection, and perhaps with a normal noise, so to say, to get different things here. And my suggestion here, and that goes maybe a little bit beyond what we have here, I have animated sometimes the noise and then took just a motion blur from it. It's not working always, because when the whole object is moving, it creates maybe some other problems. But if you have an object sitting still in front of the camera and you need this effect, that would be maybe my more or less sophisticated way to do it. Anyway, you can see here with this change and the reflections and the light and all of that, there's a lot of stuff going on that is not even nearly possible to capture in one image here. And these three images, even mixed together, will not give me at all any information that I can use as a single texture. This is another example of changing the camera position, and I know that looks pretty much similar to the leaves before, but this time I have the light that comes from an area not behind it, and this time the light comes from behind it. Similar leaves, totally different results, and you might think which one we should take. And of course, this is easier on the camera, and you can introduce the backlight maybe later with an other texture. This gives the camera a little bit more work to with, and you can see here the edges are really hard for this small little camera here. This shouldn't be your problem, but in fact we have dark areas here with very bright areas here, and in this image we have the whole area much more relaxed. It's not so much to do here, and here we see we have the whole range, and of course this is not so much here. This is just that white area here. As you can see when I click on it, it's pretty easy to identify, and the dark ones are here. So with a technique like this, we need much more dynamic range to really capture this, just as a side note. But similar leaves, totally different results. Here I have just a sign where you have these reflective material inside, and this is also something that you can't really capture with a single shot. That needs to be done in Cinema 4D, and perhaps with different layers or with different channels, of course. And you can see this when you go through a sign like this and you have the sun in the back, so you get a nice reflection, that the light will change dramatically, but not very even if this texture tries to do so. It's just a little example and not well documented here, but I think you are pretty aware of that because these signs are all over the place. I think this is more than obvious what I have done here. I moved from this position with the camera to this position, a little bit closer, but the main reflections here, and take a look where they are now. Now they are with the holes, now they are between these holes, and they were before here. And here we have now no specular highlight. When I go back, we have it here, or a strong reflection if you like. So this metal here is of course completely different with any movement, and it will be different when the camera sticks and the metal moves, or if the light source moves. And the light source here is of course just the surrounding. It was, as you can see here, it's in the shadow. The light comes from the right side here, and everything that is reflected in it becomes, of course, then the main theme in that surface. And that's sometimes very difficult to reproduce, and it's more or less just painted, if you like so, because you can't capture this very well. And metal, as we have seen, is not really the best friend with polarization filters, of course. This is maybe a wonderful example where we think that would work easily because it looks so clear and everything is nice. But you can see inside of the reflectors behind the glass we have the world reflected in it, and the glass by itself is not really the main information here. Even if it sticks out, it's very bright, all these signs here, but in truth it's pretty hard to use in a foreground element. It's a dead giveaway that it is just a flat texture. How to solve that? as I said before, you might need to take the glass out, put something black maybe behind, and then recreate with a pure reflective object than the background with an environment object in it. Not simple, it's again a sandwich material, so to say, even if we know exactly the reflector and the glass are two different parts, but we can't see it separately, and there's no easy way to just take it as one or the other. Translucent materials, even if they are just flat and have not the appearance like subsurface scattering materials that we have in Cinema 4D available, these materials here give of course away which light they had from the back and from the front, and so you are trapped with two light source informations in it, and the object here is a little bit dirty, so I don't see a lot of reflection here, but in the moment I would move the camera, I might see as well reflections. Another reason to take really care of those things here and maybe create a material directly with several layers in Cinema 4D, so all these effects will show up in the way you want to have it. It's not directly something that makes maybe a lot of sense to photograph with backlight, for example, or just only backlight, and you make your own tests because each scene is differently. And sorry when I have to be that blurry here, but it's a wide variety of options always. Another great example where we have an sandwich material, because the plant and the water drops here melt together in pixels. And it's not so that the water is just really fixated on the plant, but we can't just move it away. What we need here to get this is, of course, that we take each plant and put it maybe on a scanner even, and then create with any other option these little water drops. That could be particles, this could be just a displacement with an object that is a little bit smaller, and lots of options, lots of tricks, and the situation will provide maybe a different challenge each time. So you need solutions for every single option that is maybe possible. There's no one size fits all. And that's of course the challenge of the 3D artist each time, to find those solutions. What we have to face here is that these water drops not only give me here a reflection of the environment, they cast also light on this surface here, and we see here these little areas, they are much brighter than the other, and we have a little shadow, and here this area is in caustics. So tons of challenges just with some few water drops. And the more simple things are, and a water drop is maybe the most simple thing I can think of, the more challenging it can be. And we have refraction, reflection, and caustics and shadows just from a water drop. Lots of things to think about. And of course it shows here that it illuminates what it scales up, which magnifies it at the same time. I could go on and on here with this picture. It's filled with challenges, and to recreate something like this is certainly not an easy task. What I can say here is that nothing in this picture gives me any source to get a texture from it. But what we can get from those images, and I encourage you to take those, is the reference. And the reference perhaps with a gray card, or at least something in it that has a color reference that you can use in every picture. In the old days, the Kodak box from the film was the color reference of the poor man, as we said. These days, digital cameras don't have any packages anymore, so we have to have a little gray card or a little Macbeth chart even. Okay, next example. This is maybe not really in sandwich material, even if we have tons of the same material on top of each other. And let's exclude for a moment the cylinder here, which gives another challenge with the reflections here, so we have different reflections at the same time. This is of course something that we need to model. Perhaps with dynamics we fill this whole object, and I can't see here anything that we can capture at all. again, reference is here key, but we can't take anything from this image that we could map or even use in an animation. Again, for still, that might work. Here we have a texture that works very interactively with the light that comes in, with the surface inside, holographic I would think, and with the angle in which we view it. And when I hop here over just to the other image, and you can see the camera hasn't moved here a lot, but we get a complete different picture here. We have those effects on insects, and these days, or since perhaps a decade already, on cars, where the light that goes in comes differently out based on the angle of view or the light or the object by itself. This is nothing where I would think a texture can handle this. And in terms of photo or image, pixel based, this needs to be done inside of the application, and perhaps we need just a rainbow environment and a normal path that gives these little prisms here, to say it in a simplified way, and then we can fake maybe this effect. This is really hard to do in Cinema 4D, and it's impossible to do in an image. This is not a sandwich material at all, but it contains areas with air, and if you take air as something that is a material by itself, then of course it's a sandwich material. And that causes finally that we have surfaces inside of that object, which causes reflections, different refractions, and different density of this material here at all. This is of course pretty much, again, nothing that we can reproduce with a single shot of it, and it needs to be built inside of Cinema 4D. This image here has a huge quality as reference, but not at all when we want to use this in the texture channels. Sums it already up, and I think we could go on and on with examples, and you find maybe even 100 more that I could discuss here, but the bottom line is we have already found pretty much the rule of thumb. Anything that moves or where the light goes in a different way through an object, like here, it could be also milk or something like that, but it's not that simple to show. I think we see here more the reflections, here more the light that goes through. Here is the part where the light has the most problems, and then we see here reflections again. We see here something that is on the ground, and this is all nothing that I would think is possible in one texture. This area here even also not at all, because we have reflections here and light and different areas. Very difficult at all. So the next part would be, of course, when we have inside of an object something, we have discussed this, and we have also different appearances from an object based on the dimensions and how much light goes through and so on. Not possible. And last but not least, and then I stop already, this simple plastic cup here has so many challenges if we want to create exactly this from a texture, that I would think put it directly into Cinema 4D, take only here the logo from it, but here we have light that disables to get a nice texture from it. We should illuminate it nicely, but then again, it's translucent. It has that subsurface scattering idea in it, and it has here a dull area and here a reflective area, so we have to split it anyway. And we could go on and on. Again, I think this is maybe even a little bit blurry here, a better suited reference than anything that I would call a texture. And that sums it up already. We have seen which are the most important parts of the equation. Of course, we could say also fog, for example, or smoke is something that we can't really capture. And so is a lot of stuff that is three-dimensional. And when it has a little bit or more transparency and can refract or change the appearance of light over the time, or if it is reflective, then we have a problem as well. Sandwich materials was discussed, and how to get those finally into Cinema 4D is a longer story. But with a texture, this might be impossible. And so before you even try and waste your time, shoot nice reference images from that with a gray card or even with a Macbeth chart, so you can really take advantage of it. And my idea of reference images is normally to shoot 3 bracketings, so you get any camera influence away when you have a camera response curve, for example. So it's straight and you can really measure those values. Of course, it depends always on the light source. Lots of influence on just a little object. Anyway, I think this was helpful and will save you a little bit time next time you shoot for textures. Thanks a lot. Have fun with it. Bye bye.